Ringer's off. Live.
How your son's doing?
Well, we got grandfather's call today because. Huh?
Because you're mean.
No, because I worry about my financial future.
Tom, there's two maps. Tom, did you get both of the two maps?
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
You're schooling yourself.
Oh. Quick dinner.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So anyway, I'm making sure I can mustard on myself.
Just me.
Where the coffee place is, are they making that road all the way through there or not? You know, by the front way, the Toads? Is that going to go through?
No, it is not going to connect the park.
Oh, that's a shame, but that would be good if had done that.
You know, we had discussed that, but we don't own the right-of-way. They were thinking about bringing in the back entryway to get in line, but they decided not to. So
But they would have alleviated some traffic on that other
it
road.
would have,
Mr.
yes.
Golick.
So we had talked about it, and I was
How are
kind of
you?
hoping, but
Not speaking to me, apparently. Oh. Are you not speaking to me?
Good evening.
Are we
No.
that mad at each other?
I was just concentrating. I'm sorry.
Well, thank goodness. I was worried there for a second.
No.
The third time, yeah, the third time.
Does anybody need any coffee or anything while I'm in here hitting the button? Anyone?
No, thank you.
Anyone? Whiskey? Anyone? Anyone? Mary and I, we're down. Anyone else?
Lemon drop.
Lemon drop.
Yeah, lemon drop.
Got a shaker going in the background.
Push the cap and throw it away.
Yeah.
Because he doesn't like so they will say you were distracting the car, and then come after the car. And I said, I don't know what the question now is the car way, so I had to drive it. Of course, I had to just pick up the desk one, take him to the desk, drop him off the
Travis.
yes,
Do we have time to talk or no? We don't have time.
yes.
Sorry. Okay. Tracy.
Yes, sir.
Okay, you guys were on the
So anyway, so that's how he's doing.
Good.
But I'm going to do it for 24 hours. I think it'll get the point across.
Okay, we're live.
Good evening, everybody. It is Monday, July 22nd, 2019 at 7 p.m. This is a special meeting for the City of Woodland Council to discuss resolution number 710. If I can get everyone to silence your cell phones and stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, thank you very much. Will the clerk please take the roll?
Councilmember Fredericks,
Here.
Councilmember Rounds,
Here.
Councilmember Graham,
Here.
Councilmember Chapman,
Here.
Councilmember Benjamin, Councilmember Humbert, Councilmember Plaza.
All right, it doesn't appear Mr. Plaza is here this evening, but it is a special meeting, so I don't believe he needs to be excused. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, moving on. Come to a portion of the agenda for approval.
Move to approve the agenda as presented.
I'll second.
Moved by Councilmember Humber, seconded by Councilmember Rounds. Will the clerk please take the vote?
Councilmember Benjamin, Councilmember Humbert,
Aye.
Councilmember Chapman,
Aye.
Councilmember Rounds,
Aye.
Councilmember Fredericks,
Aye.
Councilmember Graham.
Aye.
All right, the agenda has been approved. The time is now 7:02. We are in a public hearing at this time to take comments on resolution number 710, Transportation Improvement Plan 2020 through 2025. I don't have my sign-up sheets. Did anyone sign up? I'm sorry. Thank you, Ms. Coleman. I didn't think to grab it. Are you guys going to speak?
No, nobody signed up.
Okay. If there's anyone in the audience at this point that would like to provide testimony, now's your opportunity to step forward. I can't believe that you were going to sit back there. Yeah, that's okay. We'll go ahead. Please state your name, and we'll give you. Is it still 5 minutes? I just want to make sure we're okay. We'll give you 5 minutes.
Aaron Thoney, property on Gora again on Davidson. You guys heard what I had said last week and the letter that I sent you. My huge concern, as stated in the previous letter, is how the roads are set up down in the southwest industrial area. I want to make sure, I previously heard, and we had the discussion this morning about, how the new people who come here, whoever dedicates a road, gets to set the roadways. Again, what was done back in 2010 is a little different than what the transportation plan is. I'm very concerned about the Davidson Street Avenue crossing. With that one road, especially going straight down next to the railroad tracks, which is too close to the Davidson Avenue crossing, as I stated in my letter last week about the problem, pinch point on the Davidson Avenue crossing going west and people getting stuck on top of the railroad tracks. But whatever roads are going in, I want to make sure that in the future this doesn't provide the good excuse to close the Davidson Avenue railroad crossing, because if that railroad crossing closes, that will just completely kill downtown Woodland, because there's no other way really to get into downtown Woodland except for 3 ways out of that way. So again, I know you guys inherited an absolute mess in the way of planning, and you're trying to weed your way through it. I just want to make sure that the longtime people aren't thrown under the bus. So that's about it.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Erin.
Please state your name and address, and we'll give you 5 minutes.
Jennifer Ray Keene, Port of Woodland. Want to first say thank you to Travis and Tracy for meeting with Erin and I this morning and going over the map. What is very clear is that we need to have a full-blown transportation plan for the city of Woodland. We have bigger issues impacting the city. Most of them are not residents of Woodland, and you guys are well aware of that. And the impacts of those on Clark County side, Cowles County side, coming down from 503, CC Street Bridge coming over, and the growth. What it's going to do is just create more issues. Obviously, we want to be good partners and with creating a proper solution. The problem is that trying to find a solution just with drawing some lines on a map is very difficult. We are dedicated to ensuring that we extend Howard to Guild. We have the funding for it. We're doing the final engineering for it. Should be underway by the end of this year, maybe beginning of next year. Depends on how bids go. And then starting that backbone portion of what we identify as Rose Way. So what was by Guild, we now name it Rose Way Industrial Park. There was a lot of confusion of what our industrial parks were called. So we changed one to Centennial for the Centennial Orchard, the other one to Rose Way. Because to give you some background, and what we talked about this morning was we were told we had to provide that background or backbone all the way down to the 460 acres. We actually originally fought that because we didn't want to pay for that infrastructure. And, we thought it was in Guild, and it wasn't. So, the whole plan for 20 plus years was that Sherman Way was going to extend all the way down. It would eventually hit Wayland Road. That was understood by every executive director prior to me, but things change. Growth happens, and with Columbia River Carbonates and their rail line, what we're looking at is the potential now within that 460 acres. If you know where Columbia River Carbonates, they crossed Pekin, taking the rail line across, they're looking at possibly expanding that rail line that would meet all these other properties. That makes that property much more valuable if it's rail served. And in the market, rail served property that's dual served with Burlington Northern and UP, along with flat land with utilities. You don't find it on I-5. You don't find it anywhere from Washington to California. That's going to be sought after property. We want to be able to see this, which means working with these property owners to make sure that the utilities get down there. That's where we think as a port, as being a good partner to this. We have financial ways to be able, and tools that ports are given to be able to do these things. And that's where we were coming up with solutions about creating this backbone down what would be Rose Way, along the parcel lines of Bozarth to Caples, and then working on, as it goes to Wayland, depending on when annexation happens. But it also creates a conversation with the county because of Wayland. That means that we need transportation, mostly the industrial traffic, to go over Wayland. And so we need to look at, not having another at-grade crossing. We need to have an overpass. We need to go over that for trucks to have proper access. So we don't have another Scott Avenue. We don't have another Davidson. So this is where we want to see that conversation go. But this is all about transportation planning. A map does not do it. We really need to see about a long-term plan where it really outlines the transportation. I really hope this council will consider it through their budget process of taking that hard look, because it has been kicked down, the can has been kicked down the road way too long. And these property owners, like the Thonies, have been hurt by it. And now we have to do something, because now we're having all these other growth situations impacting us. And, I can't attract business here if I can't get them moving. If I can't get employees to their workplace and I can't get their product out to the marketplace, there's nothing we can do. And that's going to be the biggest thing. Water, sewer, we can get through that. But transportation, it has to be a key issue to this council coming up now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I ask a clarifying question that was raised, Mr. Goddard? Rose Way, is that what this is being referred to here, this extension from, it looks like from Howard to Guild, sorry. I knew that was going to get a laughter from
So-
over there.
South
long
of
have you been
Guile,
here,
it's
Councilmember Frederick?
slightly angled.
Yes, is that what you're referring to as Rose Way?
Yes,
On the south side, not the little jog.
not the little jog. The little jog is a connection of Howard,
Okay.
finishing Howard to Gordon.
And that's the one that Ms. Kane referred to as having to be there.
Howard to Guile.
Guile.
Okay.
So this,
required to bring the utilities and fix the issues in Guile Road.
Okay. We are still in a public hearing. For those of you who failed to sign up, now's your opportunity to step up to the mic there. Please state your name, address, and 5 minutes will be allotted to you, sir.
15 seconds.
Oh, go.
Tom Golick, 218 Davidson Woodland. Only wish to mirror what Aaron said about making sure we do not eliminate the rail crossing at Davidson. That would be a rather disaster for the efforts that everybody's been making to revitalize and keep downtown vital. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, sir. That was almost 20 seconds, but, well, you did state your name. All right, anyone else in the audience who would like to step up at this time? All right, seeing no one else, it is 7:11. We're out of public hearing and moving on to action items. Action item A, Resolution 710, Transportation Improvement Plan 2020-2025.
Mr. Goddard, provide us a presentation. Is that what the plan is?
yes.
Do
Okay.
we need to vote on it first?
Hold on.
No.
Okay, good.
I'm assuming that council is asking for Mr. Goddard to provide a presentation before a motion is made?
Yes,
It's Garrick,
please.
right? It's Garrick Road?
Or-
Gorick. See.
I don't know.
Eric.
Miss
Gary.
Garrick?
That's not who you talked to.
Garrick, all right, Garrick.
It's Gory to you
Gorick.
too.
Okay.
There's no go.
I'm trying to figure out what it really is called.
G Street.
Oregon or Oregon?
Oregon.
All right, Mr. Goddard.
So I wanted to do a couple, a little bit of background just to make sure that we're all on the same page when we know we're talking about the tip, because as a planner, I'm not a transportation engineer, I'm not an engineer, so I had to do some of this research, so I wanted to make sure we were all on the same page. So transportation planning, especially when we're talking about tapping transportation pots of money, this is really important stuff, so I want to make sure we're all using the same language. The Federal Transportation, Department of Transportation, they deal with the interstate stuff like Interstate 5. So they are a factor of what we're talking about. Also, the Washington State Department of Transportation, they take care of the STIP, which is the Statewide Transportation Improvement Program. And it is a 3-year program. The regional Transportation Improvement Program, the RTIP, is actually administered by kind of two partners. One is the Council of Governments. The other is the Regional Transportation Planning Organization, which is, we are on the Cowlitz County side, is the 4 counties north of us. There's also one for Southwest Washington. I didn't put it on here, but we're also part of that one as well. And then, of course, locally, the City of Woodland Transportation Improvement Program. Ours is actually a 6-year improvement program. And so generally, when you're talking about how to access that transportation money, we identify projects. In our case, we have 34. Maybe by the end of the night, we might have 37 projects on our list. So we throw a bunch of stuff on our list, and then that's our tip. And it goes to the Regional Transportation Improvement Program, and they might narrow it down to what actually makes the cut for funding. And then, of course, it goes up to the State Transportation Improvement Program, and we might have 1 or 2 projects on the STIP if we're lucky. And so Tracy can talk about what our particular projects that have been funded when she is a second here. But the idea being that we start with a bunch of projects and it gradually narrows down to what we actually can afford to build. Depends upon a lot of these other organizations and the priorities of what we want versus what the others have in line. There's 3 key...
Mr. Goddard, can I jump in for a second?
Yeah.
Would the Westcott Reclamation be part of the, can you go back one slide? Was that part of this plan at all? Or is that completely separate?
It is.
It is, okay, so that's a project that made the STEP, or?
That was on the tip that went to the STIP that is funded. Correct.
Okay, gotcha. No, I'm trying to follow.
And Exit 21 study is probably the only other STIP that we have?
That is funded, correct.
Okay.
So
So it has to have money.
yes, so Exit 21 is the other one that we currently have funded on the state program. So there's 3 types of projects. First of all, there's funded. That's improvements that have secured funding and they're ready to proceed with design, permits, and construction. Then there's planned, which is not funded but reasonably funding, or we expect funding to be available. And then unfunded is everything else that's on the list, but we don't reasonably expect it to be built, especially within the time limits of the 3-year or the 6-year plan that we're looking at. So I'd like to get on to the public comments that were received at the last meeting and that you wanted me to go back and make sure I cover. So I took it to be infrastructure study update, the 2010 transportation ordinance that Miss Tony brought up, and then railroad closing of the crossing, infrastructure study, and advisory group engagement or public engagement. So Tracy, can you do a quick update on this?
Yeah. So first of all, I'll go over the 460 acres, which is the feasibility study. As you all know, we hired Gibson Olson as a consultant to do that, and they have multiple sub-consultants under them, one of them being BST, and they're doing the economic and market analysis for us, for Gibson Olson that will provide to us. Right now, Rich is putting together comments back to go to BST, and then we anticipate a draft within a couple weeks to be able to provide to the city, the port, and property owners for review. In addition, I'm meeting with SJC, which is the traffic sub-consultant to Gibson Olson, and they actually, we're going to talk to them about the traffic study, and I'm going to involve Kittleson and Associates, which is our Exit 21 traffic consultant, in that conversation as well, to make sure that when we look at this, we look at the evaluations of each consultant and what their role plays to the city as a whole for how does Exit 21, how is that being affected by the 460 acres, how are the 460 acres affecting Exit 21, and we work together with them. So we don't overlap, but we're all working together to see how do we get the most benefit from both of these studies from the consultants. So we're working together with both of them. And then also, we spoke of today, and one of the items that came out of our meeting this morning was a way for the citizens to be able to see everything, and I think a good way to do that, and I recommended this, I don't know if this is the exact route that would go, but sending a postcard out to the citizens so they can have something they can send out, put on their refrigerator or put wherever they want, and they know a place that they can go on our city website that shows anything that we have updated from any of our industrial study or our traffic study, that they can go to our website and click on this link, and that's where all this information is going to be, so they can see updated information at any time. It's a very simple mailing, it's a very simple web link, and then they'll know where to go at all times. And so they don't have to come to a council meeting to find out that that's where the information is. They'll get the postcard in the mail, they can see it here on the council meeting, we can present that as well. Just an idea that we're kind of throwing around there, but I think that would be a good way to make sure all the property owners know that this is going on, here's where you can find information on it. So that's kind of what's going on with the industrial feasibility study. In regards to the actual Kittleson and Associates for Exit 21, I'm meeting with them, WashDOT, Cowlitz County, and the CW Cobb, which are all part of the TIP, state TIP, regional TIP, STIP, etc., on 7/31 for a presentation from Kittleson Associates to show us exactly what they found so far with the traffic counts in the area and kind of an updated schedule of what's to come and when we're going to have public involvement and when they plan on presenting what their findings are, what their recommendations are. Again, we're still in the early stages on both of these, so we'll know a little bit more probably by the beginning of next month as far as more of a scheduled timeline. And then last but not least, this doesn't truly have to do with the traffic plan, but I know it is of concern to the citizens, and I raised this with Aaron this morning. By the end of this week, I hope to have a start date to bring in the boring exploration for the railroad tracks, which we're talking about increasing that water line size to go over to that industrial area. And so I'm hoping that we have a date set up for the boring exploration to happen here this next month. So that'll be going as well. Again, this is all a very long process. You know, we applied for the railroad permit last year. We finally got a temporary permit. This boring is part of us moving forward to be able to move forward to put that big casing underneath the railroad track. So that's kind of a quick, sweet update of what's going on with the studies right now. Any questions?
Mr. Fredericks.
So,
Mr. Fredericks.
if I understand, so we did a transportation study back in 2010, and that was, I remember it vaguely.
Okay.
So when do we do another one? And you might have said it in that, but you lost me.
I did not say it in that.
Okay, so when would we typically do an update to, we did something in 2010, when will we do another transportation plan?
So a traffic study and an overall citywide transportation study are kind of two different things. The traffic study is included in your overall transportation study of the city as a whole. I can't answer that question because I don't know when the last one was fully done. And Aaron, do you know by any chance if we did an overall one? I believe it was in the early 2000s from what Rob V had said. I have not read it, but that's my understanding of when the last one was done and where it's at. I am not sure at this time, but it doesn't mean I can't find it.
So 20
Did
years.
I answer your question?
Well, no, it sounds about right. We pay for a study. Sometimes we pay for studies, I've noticed, and especially years ago we paid for studies that now we have to take off the shelf and blow the 3 inches of dust off of it because it hasn't really left the shelf.
And with that being said, and I hate to say this, when you have a study from the early 2000s and now we're in the late 2000s, 15 years later, it might not, portions of it would be useful to us, but other portions of it no longer are applicable. So, but I haven't read it yet, so I don't know in particular that
So
study.
would it be time, testimony this evening, would it be time to discuss a citywide transportation?
That is actually in my budget for next year, and it's something that I have brought up to the mayor, and I've brought it up to my committee, Public Works Committee. It's one of the first things I realized when I came here, that our standards and our overall traffic roads do not match.
Okay.
Isn't that how we ended up with this last year, with all the additional lines?
It
correct?
is
Because
a portion of why we ended up with that. We're like,
Okay.
what's going on here? It's only a small portion of it, though.
Okay.
Yes.
And in that funding, because there's going to be a funding request, my assumption would be is that there's going to be partners that are going to come to the table to help us with that? Other
Absolutely.
agencies?
Yes.
You're going to work on that?
Yeah.
as we all look to the back of the room. Hello, Port.
Well, I
Let
mean,
me get my checkbook.
you said it. I was trying to be a little
No,
Not just them, though.
It's
I'm
something that's very
assuming.
important that needs to be done, and all
Right.
the roads need to be identified with all the growth that's coming to Woodland.
Yes.
If you guys all read the front page of the Columbia newspaper this past weekend,
Sunday.
you missed it.
I
have
showed
on
it to you.
my-
We were
on
in the
my desk.
grocery store together. I showed it to
I
you.
read it.
Yeah, but I'm just
Lee.
saying that this is something I think that's pretty critical for the city, because, you know, we do have a lot of growth, and we have growth on the opposite side of tracks. We have tracks that are involved, we have waterways that are involved, we have bridges that are involved, and it is something that I don't think has been looked at overall. But I also don't believe that we've had the growth that's come forward this year as we have in years past. It's been kind of anticipated a certain % growth rate, but really now we're seeing people come to the table with money, purchasing property, development happening, and so now it's more critical than ever.
I would say right now, we are paying for the sins of lack of planning.
20
20 years ago.
Yep,
and
yep,
the
we all
situation-
agreed upon that in the
Yes.
meeting this morning.
Yeah, we're
Yes.
absolutely in that boat.
I believe it was called patchwork.
Yep.
Woodland is masterful at
Yeah.
patchwork planning.
But that's something that we want to get away from, and we're trying to assure that we can do that.
I think that's the.
But it's a hard, it's a
Sure.
steep hill to climb.
I think that's the goal, is to get away from patchwork planning.
Absolutely.
And make sure that we set the next generation of council, the next city leaders up with a roadmap.
A roadmap is exactly what we're looking for.
Right.
Yep.
Does the Exit 21 address any of the, what's that?
Excuse the pun.
Unintended.
Does Exit 21 address any transportation? Would what comes out of that, will that address or help with the transportation plan?
Yes.
Overall?
Yes, because it shows where our traffic is flowing and the counts where it's flowing. It won't address fully all the roads within the city, but it'll address where those traffic counts are, those particular main roads that are within the city, to say, what should they really be classified as based
Okay.
on the traffic counts? And based on what type of traffic, because the counts that are being studied with Kittleson Associates aren't only how many vehicles, how many buses, how many semis, how many cars are going through there. And they also have I think it's it's not a Bluetooth, it's some device that they have. They can show if it's repeat traffic to say that, oh, we don't have, 50 buses, we had 20 buses and 30 of them will repeat this going back from A and B. So that's kind of good to have. And it won't be on all the roads, but on certain roads.
I'm getting somewhere with my line of questioning here. Can any of that money, I know we've expanded some of that study and we've been able to kind of push that money out a little bit and use it for.
It cannot be used for I've already asked that
Okay.
question. Yes,
Okay.
that was one of the
Thank
first
you.
things I asked about last year, and they said, nope.
How far can we go?
Exactly, but what we can do is use a portion of what we're doing now to aid in the reduced costs in the
Okay,
future.
perfect, awesome. Sorry to hijack there. Trying to get somewhere.
So if you don't mind me throwing in a bit of the answer, the study itself is the technical stuff. It's the vision of where you want stuff to go. Unfortunately, kind of the missing middle of this between the studies and the implementation is the tool that gets it from the study to actually in real life. For uses, that's zoning. When you're talking about quality of life, that's the standards, whether it's the design review or the lot sizes, that kind of stuff. And for transportation, it's the TIP. For water and sewer infrastructure, it's the capital improvement program for the water and sewer. So the problem is that the city of Woodland has always kind of never been great at the visioning on the traffic side, and apparently we did it, but we didn't pay any attention to actually putting it on a list of projects to be funded and prioritization, and so we kind of totally let it fall into the background because nobody was paying any attention. Theoretically, if it was adopted in 2010, it should have been on the 2011 TIP. It should have been in the transportation chapter of the 2015 update. And so we should have had several iterations of the map where it goes from your vision to toolbox to the actual requirements, so that when a development comes in, we're not trying to guess at what the roads should look like. We should have been looking at the guidelines and implementing the tools. That's kind of where the planning failed you in that sense. So, just proof that the patchwork hasn't been working. So I, just as a quick reminder, I wanted to point out remind us where we got in this conversation. So this is the 2010 Southwest Woodland Industrial Transportation Plan, and Exhibit A was attached to the ordinance, and it includes this map, which they call the shared north-south concept. I'm not sure exactly why they came up with that name, but it shows this is Howard, this is Sherman. There is a connection down here, but it doesn't go all the way down to Wayland. There is one that would extend Pekin all the way down and includes some cross streets, cross connections. So this is the one that was with the ordinance that Erin has mentioned that she keeps giving to planners every couple years as we get a new planner on board. Part of it, a very small part of it, made it into the comprehensive plan, specifically whereas the other plan showed it coming down from Pekin and straightening this out. In the plan, it shows that there is a connection North Pekin from the corner of Caples down to Gorig, and that we would install a cul-de-sac there. And so that part is in the plan, but again, it's not a transportation plan. It's just a map of recommendations. So it's kind of like we point to specific information and then say this might be applicable. So it's not very helpful. The tip itself, we had 9 to 11 items in the years prior to 2018, and one of the first things I said when I got here is, where are the projects? How am I supposed to advise developers what to do? And so we went out and started holding a bunch of open houses and discussions, and I went to the Chamber of Commerce and I said, what are the small projects that will help your day-to-day commute? You know, I know we have this $84 million wish list, but it doesn't really seem to give us anything that will make your lives any easier in the next 20 years while we're waiting for our $80 million. So that's kind of how we came up with this giant list, and there's really two parts of the tip that you look at. That's kind of the map, and then there's the actual spreadsheets of the information that you have. So when you look at that, you'll see that there's identification right here. It kind of tells you this one is for the overlay of West Scott Avenue, and it tells you where it is, and you can see that it's 0.17 miles long. And then, of course, it tells you what year we expect it to be built, and then whether we're going to use federal, state, or local funds. In this case, this project is all local funds. So you guys are familiar with this because you probably see it every year, right? And it doesn't look like it really changed any until last year, and all of a sudden we threw a bunch of stuff on it. And part of the reason why we did that is because we got to start the conversation, right? There's so much more that we need to think about, and here we are a year later, and all of a sudden it's like, we're freaking out because there's a lot of conversation about the stuff that we put on it last year. So this is progress. I'm sorry it doesn't feel like a good thing, but this is progress, and that's why we're here. So Erin, in her letter and in the meeting this morning, brought up this thing like, I keep telling people that, yeah, if you have an application, you're the first one through the door, you get to make some of the major decisions. And because we don't have our act together, we don't necessarily have a lot of influence over that. And here's a great example, because this is the one of the spaghetti that we threw on the wall last year that stuck, and that's the 3 bypasses over in the industrial district. And this is Port's Industrial Phase 2. They now call it Centennial. And this is the Roseway Industrial Park, used to be Phase 1. So when we approved this industrial park, Howard Way comes down and jogs to the right or to the east and connects to Guild. And then Rose Industrial Park installs Roseway along their property line. So again, to show you that the tip is not perfectly accurate, it's just a representation of where we expect to have a connection go through. This is a great example because the port came in and they're building the road. They get to decide where they build the road, but it's roughly consistent with what we wanted. So what we did is this year we made a correction, and specifically we're trying to draw in that the new Howard alignment connection to Guild, so that way when the port goes to get that federal funding, it won't look like last year's map where they're just building a road that's 100 feet away from where the city has decided the road's going to go. No, it shows that we are in fact consistent, and the port is planning consistent with our plan. And the fact that they're first through the door and their alignment determined the map isn't necessarily a bad thing, because it shows that we are making progress and we're consistently accommodating, being friendly to business. Because we didn't want to have to deny them because it doesn't match our red lines on our map, which we really didn't get down and do a transportation plan. It's a vision, and we're trying to implement it as best we can. So on Monday, we were here last Monday. So the original staff report, or the original agenda memo that went to you, we had made some last minute adjustments based upon the comments that had come in. And what we did is we actually added 3 things. We added the east-west connector that was on that ordinance map. We also added the intersection improvements, which were raised by Ms. Stoney. And then the north-south connector through that farmland that was on the map that was adopted previously. So we had made those 3 changes. And since our conversation, we actually made a couple different changes today. So we've reflected the approved road segments, the alignments that were approved. Also, the other thing we did is we showed this line coming down and following property lines, which is a little more accurate rather than just the generic lines that we have over here to the west and over here to the east, because we don't know where that road is going to go, but we're pretty confident we know where this one is. Part of the reason why we're confident is because we've already approved this portion of the road. We know that the Tony family has a dedicated 60-foot strip that they expect to be the alignment in the south, and it will come along adjacent to their property to the south. So we have a lot more confidence now, having had the conversation, that this one is a lot more accurate. So that wasn't actually ready on Monday, and we didn't actually come up with that till we had a chance to talk to the port and Aaron this morning. But it goes...
Before you move.
Sure.
So is that, so, I have a process question. So if ordinance number 1198 has already been approved by council, that's what we're working under, it would seem to me that it would be problematic to change a plan that's already been adopted by council without that same plan being in here. Is this consistent now after the changes that were made in here?
So that's a good question. Typically, a transportation plan and a transportation map and the transportation chapter of the comprehensive plan is not that specific. We don't determine exactly where the roads go. So say, for example, we determine that the Blacktail subdivision, that land before it was subdivided is going to be residential, and it is going to collect the homes to Gun Club or Insel Road, which will go to Lewis River. The comprehensive plan is not intended to be such specific detail that we tell them exactly where their roads are going to go, because ultimately that's a design criteria that they have to meet. And I have another slides or some other, let's take another example. Sorry if I can find the last map. So say, for example, the one that we're going to have problems with, and that is, actually I probably go to the bigger scale one here. If you look at this alignment here extending Sherman Way south, there's currently some buildings in the way. There's also some wetland in the way. So ultimately, determining that road alignment should not be a comprehensive 20-year in advance decision. All we really want to do is make sure that there's an alignment, and when the individual developers come in, that we can talk to them. And the reason why this is also or the reason why this is important is because when we look at the Carpenito brothers who are looking at developing this property here, so they have frontage, and they've proposed frontage on Caples, Gorig, and all the way out Gehrig to the end of their property. This red line actually represents the west edge of their property. And do we ask them for 35 feet of right-of-way to be set aside, or do we allow them to build their warehouse right up to the property line? Because at this point, we don't know where that road is going to go, but we know there's going to be a road in there, and should they be responsible for setting aside their half of that right-of-way? And so the planner and public works are in a position where we know we need a road, we're not sure where it is, but we have somebody in line who wants to build a multi-million-dollar project, bring 300 jobs to the community. Do we tell them yes with no right-of-way, or do we tell them we need right-of-way, and that kind of is a predetermining factor for the next person to come through the door? Well, you got to build it in this location because we already have the right-of-way. It's a never-ending wrestling match that staff kind of continually needs to evaluate.
So, that was a long-winded answer.
Yeah, sorry.
Thank you for not keeping it short, making me pay attention to the answer. My assumption is that when ordinance number 1198 was passed, that was part of this transportation plan. There was public testimony, there was public comment, the whole 9 yards. It went through a process.
It went through a public process?
I'm not seeing in 1198 where it's saying that this is it says it's to help clarify and supplement the transportation element of the city's 2005 comprehensive plan. It is to help clarify. I read that as it's helpful, but does that mean we can adjust the plan accordingly at a later time?
It is a vision document that is not implemented by the TIP, because if it's on the TIP, then theoretically it changes from a vision to a actual project where we have dedicated and determined that that's specifically what we're going to do.
Okay. It would. Okay.
Are you trying to ask the question, are we following our own ordinance, or have we just dismissed it? Is that what you're asking? Or how is the ordinance improving what we're doing now?
The ordinance to me seems like it's kind of,
outdated?
It says one thing, but then 10 years later, we've decided to possibly do something different.
Yeah.
And I don't.
Well,
Again, both of those went through public testimony.
you ask a key question. Does the ordinance tell us where it will be or where it should be? And that's a question I don't necessarily have the answer to. Typically, vision documents are should. And the reason why I say that is because if that is specifically where we intended it, then we would have done the environmental review, we would have done the permitting, we would have done the right-of-way acquisition, which is all part of the TIP process to actually implement that plan. But we did no analysis of who that burdens and whether it's a fair distribution of the cost for that road, and are all property owners burdened with the amount of that cost commensurate to the benefit for their property.
Okay.
And none of that was done.
Go back a previous slide. So, the revised, I get the whole, I understand that it's following the property line, but to me, that the way that Howard extension kind of jogs there to the, if I'm heading south, where it kind of jogs and then it comes down, it's almost, I'm now taking a quick, if I'm coming, it just doesn't seem like it's real smooth when I'm having to take a left and then an immediate right. Is that safe? I mean,
well, it's very similar to kind of the Sherman Way left turn to take a right on Pekin. And is it the best of both worlds? No. But it kind of gets back to that question of should we have denied the Port their industrial park because they didn't extend Howard through the middle of Centennial Park? We could have, theoretically, if we had looked at this map and said, no, absolutely, the city has decided exactly where that's going to go. But the individual developer did the evaluation of their site, and the Port decided to keep Centennial Park. Just like eventually, if Sherman ever continues south, it may go around the Groats Barn, it may go around the wetland, it may go around historical buildings to the south, not because it's on the map that goes around those buildings, but because the developer who's going to pay the money to install the road, they get to decide what they spend their money on.
So I'm also might be disconnected here a little bit too. So if the Port has the money to develop from Howard to Guild, then why does it matter if it's in our plan? Why does it have to be in our plan? Why don't they just develop the road?
And that's a great point. Like Blacktail subdivision or Meriwether subdivision, we don't tell them where the roads go. We just simply need to tell them, when you build this, it has to be X amount of feet wide in the right of way, has to have curb, gutter, and sidewalk, and has to have 2 lanes or 4 lanes and a center turn lane. We look at the pure mechanics of what the construction looks like, but they theoretically have the flexibility of deciding where it gets built on the property and how their buildings interact with the street.
Okay. Ms. Coleman.
So I just want to clarify that this tip is a plan to show that we need connections throughout the city. We need a connection. Whether that connection is a straight line or an S curve, we still need a connection point. This particular one, when they come in for a pre-application, we look at what they're proposing and where they're putting the roads. We actually review the road placement. We actually review site distances and turn radiuses for where the roads are going. So in this particular case, that was reviewed coming from Guild Road, taking a left onto, what road is that? Right there, what's that road? Coming from, what's your road up north?
Howard.
Thank you. From Howard Way, turning on Guild Road and then going down what they're calling Rose Way. That was looked at by the transportation analysis saying, are the site distances good? What's the distance between intersections? All that's looked at ahead of time before we approve that site plan. So that was looked at. But again, our tip says we need a connection point. They're saying, well, we don't want to put a connection point right through the middle of the park. Can we do this? And we're like, yep, that works. So that's kind of what that's about.
Okay.
And then one other thing I wanted to say is that when we're talking about planned versus funded versus the pipe dream of it needs to go on there because we know we need a connection point. Just remember, planned is what we're planning, what we have tip money for, or transportation improvement, transportation impact fees. So anything that we can do that's planned is where we're getting those transportation impact fees from. And we don't have a lot of money on transportation impact fees,
Right.
so what we're kind of counting on is when people come through the door to say, hey, we know, city, that you want to have a connection point here, and while we're buying this property, we really can't give you that straight line, but we can kind of jog it over and give you part of that connection that you're looking for. And in addition to it being on here, when those applicants, in particular the Port here, when they go out for grants, it has to be on our plan in order for them to get grant dollars as well. So well, it doesn't have to be on our
That
plan
makes sense.
for their grant dollars, but they show that it's part of the city's overall plan, which helps with their grant application.
Okay.
So.
And she made me think of something in addition. So these red lines, they are unfunded projects that are on our tip list, but that portion of Howard is going to be built at the developer's expense. So in a sense, we are achieving our tip, and we are building unfunded projects, not with public funds, but with Port private development funds or a private developer. So in this sense, what we can say is, we've gotten several hundred feet and 1,000 feet of this bypass that's on our tip, but we're getting it built by private funds, by the private developer. So in a sense, that's kind of how this process works, and we're getting at that tool between the vision. These are the implementation tools. In this case, it's a private developer who's implementing our vision. Okay. So the second item, or the third item, is the railroad crossing closure. There is no proposal to close the crossing, and there have been no plans to close the crossing. There is no proposal to build a railroad overpass or an underpass, so I needed to make sure that those are clear. But you can never say never. If the city were to build an overpass or an underpass, we could close the at-grade crossing. What are the chances of us doing that? That's a better question for you than for me, right? And then also, if we were to ever build a third exit to I-5, say south of town at Wayland or Pinkerton, it might make sense for us to route our traffic south to Wayland and then out to the highway rather than through downtown and exit 21. So it is conceivable that we may not want it open. Also, there's the question of, do we want to close it to trucks only, and we want to have our trucks not coming downtown? So you can't say never, because theoretically 50 years from now is a long time and we don't know what's going to happen. So if we ever got 1, 2, or all 3 of those bypasses, really realistically we're talking about one bypass from north to south. Trucks and a lot of traffic may never have to go through that railroad crossing. So I don't want to say never, but it's, in all practical purposes, it might be never. The infrastructure studies needed to point out that since the 2010 annexation transportation study was done, we updated the comp plan in 2016, the sewer plan updated in 2017. We're working on the water plan. It should hopefully be done and adopted this year, right?
Early next year.
Early next year. So we have to recognize that staff needs to continually review the impacts of approved development, the basic infrastructure assumptions, and the capacity new information. So for example, if the Carpenitos propose a 40-acre warehouse that has 3 bathroom stalls in it versus another fish processing plant, the amount of water and sewer that they're going to use are, at opposite ends of the scale. So we might be able to approve a 50-acre warehouse, but not a 5,000 square foot fish or vegetable washing, packaging business. So we're constantly having to review and figure out, okay, how razor thin of a margin do we have? And ideally, with the comprehensive plans and the capital improvement plans and the plans, the water and sewer plan, we know that we're saving the money for the pump station upgrade, so all of a sudden we can afford that 5-acre development to go with the 50-acre warehouse that was already approved. So it is a constant juggling, and I'm constantly dealing with developers who come in and say, can I build this? Well, you need to do some of the analysis, and if you want to study the entire city's system, you can, because it might be worth it for you, but if you're going to wait for the city to do it, it takes us time, and 2010 was clearly ahead of the curve. 2019 might be a much better time, and that's why we're doing the study that we're doing.
I'd just like to make one comment, Travis's. When the 2010 ordinance was presented to me about a month ago by Aaron, I went back and I looked at the tips from 2010, because it was approved, I think, in December. So I looked at 2010, I looked at 2011, I looked at 2012, and I looked at 2013, because this has to be approved every year, our tip does. None of the information in that ordinance was in any of those years. So I forwarded that to Travis to let him know that while we approved that in our ordinance, it was not in our tip. So there was a failure to communicate as far as what needed to be on that tip. So hence the reason why we brought that in to the tip this year, to make sure that part of the information that was in ordinance. Unfortunately, some of it, what was approved, isn't exactly perfect with what's gone on since then, but majority of it, I think, can be addressed, including that Davidson Railroad crossing. So I just wanted to bring that to the attention of the council, that while it isn't perfect, I think we have a plan moving forward to make sure that some of the items and concerns that are addressed in the public are being taken into consideration.
So should the ordinance be updated if this gets approved? Does the ordinance need to be updated at all, or
I'm sorry, which ordinance?
the 2010 ordinance doesn't need to be
Oh.
brought back forward to be a 2019 ordinance now with an update or an amendment, or?
That's a good question. Tracy or some of our speakers mentioned we need to do a transportation plan because we are trying to use a screwdriver to instead of a monkey wrench. You know, they're totally different tools for, like, a better example is, so we've got this water and sewer plan, we're doing the utility rate study, and once you put the two of those together, you're going to have a financial model for how we're going to build the things that are needed according to the sewer and the water plan. So that's kind of the vision to the actual implementation, so that when you raise the rates, or whether you freeze the rates for the next 10 years like you've been raising for the last 10, you will have a clear understanding of the implementation of your vision and what we expect the city to do and what the city will actually be able to finance and do on the back end. So that's like the model where we want to get our transportation to. We need to do the actual analysis and figure out what the transportation vision should be, so we can add it to the tip, so that we can get it on the RTIP, so we can get it on the STIP, so that we can get the federal money that will implement what you guys have in your plan.
So a follow-up to the dysfunction that was described by Ms. Coleman. What is being done to ensure that ordinances and resolutions that are passed by the council are actually enacted by the executive branch? And what system do you have in place to ensure that that's done?
It's a great question. So we are having regular coordination and consultation meetings with the Department of Transportation in the county, which wasn't previously happening. We've invited the port to the next conversation so that we can get them involved, because they are going to be a great ally for us in a lot of the discussions we're having. I also think I'm going to sneak into Erin's bedroom and suck all of the knowledge out of her brain at night and bottle it, so that
up quickly.
so that we can package it for all future planners and public works directors to take advantage of. Because I learned more in the 2.5 hours with Erin and Jennifer today than I had maybe in the first, at least the 6 months before I started having the public outreach that we did for the comprehensive plan. And then at that point, stuff was coming in so quickly, I clearly wasn't assimilating it all and, understanding what she said, because there was just so much going on. But yeah, we really need to bottle all of Erin's memories and make sure that they're accessible in the future as much as we possibly can.
Ms. Coleman?
I always have a comment, of course, like Mr. Frederick. But what I'd like to say is, you're welcome, that's a compliment. What I would like to say is that one of the items that I see and that I shared in that meeting is the turnover. The city has had a lot of turnover. And so you ask, what are we doing to do that? Part of that is you need to retain your employees. And I'm not saying that the city hasn't, but they haven't.
Right.
So that's part of it. The value that Mrs. Ripp brings to the table for being here for 35 years? 30 years is you cannot get that anywhere. You can't put a price on it. You can't put a price on having a citizen that's been here and comes and continually, director after director hands you the information and says, hey, did you know about this? No, I didn't know about that. And you have a citizen that here that shares that with us. So what's in place? I think it's important that as you have a director or a new planner, we do have a changeover in staff as far as the structure itself, because it used to just be public works director. We didn't have a planner that was under public works, but I think having a planning director and public works and retaining the staff and making sure that everybody kind of knows it on the same page. I think this is a great structure that the city has come up with, instead of just having a public works director. As much as I would like to be in charge of everybody, I can't. But my point being is that's part of the process as well, as the turnover. The city of Woodland needs to retain their staff, because the staff is the knowledge, and the knowledge is what gets things going and keeps that cycle going and that process going. So unfortunately, that hasn't happened. But that is a critical component.
There's no doubt that the price of turnover is very costly.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you look at from 2010 to now, how much turnover you have.
Lots of turnover.
So anyway, I mean, that isn't the answer, but that's part of it.
It's a fair answer.
Yeah.
Can you go back one slide, please? Sure. I'd like to, Ms. Stoney brought up capacity during, or in her letter or during her testimony. Can you speak to capacity? You kind of touched on it a little bit. Can you talk about the capacity issue, or what we've stated that we don't have capacity and then we're saying we have capacity? Where are we for real?
Sure. Well, so one of the points that was brought up at this meeting this morning is it's amazing that our comprehensive plan was ever found to be growth management compliant in the first place, let alone the update was compliant. There is some sad truth to that, and the comprehensive plan says that we clearly have enough water and sewer capacity, and as I tried to get out at those meetings, and that is each system, it's not a pass-fail. It's you fix one thing and then something else breaks. So when you build a water tower, your storage is great, but now your treatment plant needs that third line. And then once the third line is installed, you need to improve your pinch points in your water distribution system, because now you have great well, adequate storage, and great treatment, but you can only get the water so far in town because of these tiny pipes that are pinching the system. Sewer is the exact same way. Got this great location with plenty of capacity at the plant, but right by the AMPM, there's a single lift station that puts everything into the plant. So no matter how much pipe you put in the ground, if that's the pinch point, you got to fix that lift station. And once that lift station is fixed, well, 300 feet away from it, it goes from a 12-inch pipe to an 8-inch pipe to a 12-inch pipe. At some point, the lift station's fine, we got to fix that 8-inch. And as soon as you fix that 8-inch, well, now the problem is the lift station up by the AMPM, because with all the industrial pumping over to the AMPM, now all of a sudden the lift station, you're constantly chasing these little fixes all over the place. So it's hard to answer that question, because if you are building houses up there behind the middle school, you may have plenty of capacity. But if you are looking at the Thoney property and you want to start washing carrots, we can't handle 1/10 of that water, so you're dead in the water. So it's not a simple question.
So how do you answer the question?
Theoretically, the water and the sewer plan will tell us, okay, which pipes, and if you actually dive into the document, and I started looking at it today, it actually tells you by 2033, this pipe is going to fail, and this pipe is going to fail, and this pipe is going to fail, and you either figure out, okay, are we going to replace this entire line, or are we just going to go and take this 100 feet because it's the closest pinch point, and we get the most bang for our buck? But that's literally what the water and sewer systems have to do. And
so the sewer plan that was adopted in 2017,
mm-hmm.
Does that tell us what we need to know so you can answer that question that was raised? I mean, because you made it sound like, well, you can do that here, and then right up the chain it's going to break, and it's going to require a fix. And then, if we make that fix, then up the chain over here it's going to require another fix. The 2017 sewer plan, I guess, do we get a good value for what we paid for, and does it tell us the answers we need to know, which is what a plan is?
Ms. Coleman, she's back. She's raising her hand.
Yeah.
Call me.
So the plan is not for determining what we need in the industry as far as the 460 acres. That's not the intent of the plan. The intent of the plan, of the water plan, is saying, what do we have? How old is our infrastructure? And when he talks about failure, what's going to fail down the road? Failure meaning we have an asbestos water line. Okay, let's just say that. And when is that asbestos water line prepared to fail? Is it 60 years old, 70 years old? Eventually, within 70 years, you're going to have to replace it. So that's part of your capital improvements in the plan, which is part of the rate study that tells you you have this infrastructure. The infrastructure is so old, it's going to fail at this time. Thus, you need to collect so much money from your residents to be able to pay for your infrastructure. Okay, now we get outside the plan. So that's your water and your sewer plans. Then we have the feasibility studies. The feasibility studies tell us if you put in this industry, this is what your capacity is going to be. And based on your capacity, this is what your current infrastructure is, and your infrastructure is not able to handle the new capacity that you're bringing in. Thus, you may have to increase a lift station, you may have to add a lift station, you may have to update the pipe sizes that you currently have in your general water and sewer plan to adhere for the capacity that you're bringing into the city. So there's two separate.
Got it.
So the plans are mandated by the state, Department of Ecology, Department of Health, and so we have to have the plans. So yes, you get a lot of bang for your buck or you're out of compliance. And it also tells you what do you need to do to keep your infrastructure running right now, up to date and in compliance, and what rates should you be charging your citizens based on how old your infrastructure is and where you're going with that. When we're talking about the sewer capacity, the sewer plant having a lot of capacity, we're only running at about 50% right now, and that's fine. We could take another 50% of what, well, not even 50, we could take about another 75%. But the key is, if we have that other 25% that we're going to bring into it, how do we get it there, and are our pipes adequately sized to bring them from point A to point B? So hence the reason why you do this utility plan to say, maybe we might want to look at just an industrial sewer plant on the other side of town. Or, you know what? If we look at 3 different lift stations and we can bring the pipes to these 3 different lift stations and upsize maybe 2 or 3 pipes, that's where we go. But that's kind of part of what you look at when you see what's going to develop in the industry. So hopefully I answered that question.
You did. Thank you.
But you can't answer the question.
I did.
No, but Travis can't when we talk about
No, you can't answer
capacity
because you
versus
don't know
no
what's
capacity.
going in yet, but I'm going to tell you right now that every time somebody comes in and develops closer and closer to that industrial, that 400 acres, that takes a little bit more out of the system. A little bit more is added to what's existing there. So that's less chance of whoever's going to come in and develop something big being able to add to our system, because now they're going to have to upgrade the system from point A all the way to point B being our sewer plant itself.
So
that's what
Carpentino
they're
can come
talking
in
about.
and do 3 stalls, and we can still have more development coming, but once the fish packing plant comes in, we're done.
Yeah. 'Cause
If we
It's
can
over.
even accept them to begin with. We don't know that yet. And that's part of what all these studies tell us.
Because part of what the plan does is it tells you, okay, where are your critical potential failure points? And if you're at the end of the pipe, you're going to go through this point, this point, this point, and this point. So their engineer knows what to study.
And that's
And-
for the industrial
Yeah.
itself, not the water or sewer plants.
Yes. So if he gets here and it fails, he's got to fix that problem, and then the next calculation is this point and it passes. Then they go to this point. Okay, this fails, so this needs to be fixed. Then you go to this point and it gets to the treatment plant and it's fine. So they may stop here and stop here, or they have to contribute to fixing that. That's all part of the engineering calculation that they do project by project. And the 2-bathroom may be nothing, but the fish plant may have to fix all 4. Then you start getting into the questions of, well, is it fair that one applicant has to fix all 4 of those points on the chain? Since they're only adding, 3% capacity, shouldn't they pay 3% of the price? That's where you start to get into what does the plan say and how much have we saved. Theoretically, we will have saved 50% by the time they come in and they contribute their 3%. And we LID the other 47%, and now everybody's got capacity because the entire problem is fixed. And we'll start saving and paying off our debt. So
So all utilities that I have worked for, including the power utility, have always treated it the same way. It's always first one in is the one that you evaluate. So I'm going to give you an example. Let's say you have a 25 kVA transformer that's out there that's serving one house. A guy is building the house, they say, you know what, we're going to put in a transformer to serve that house, okay? Then another person builds right next door to him. And the next person builds right next door. They say, hey, can I use that 25 kVA transformer? And they say, yep, there's enough power to serve you two. So now you have two houses on that one transformer. Okay? Some of the times the power companies allow the person who put the transformer in to begin with, which is kind of the way our LID works, to pay that first person who put it in a certain percentage back towards what it costs them to do the transformer. Let's say a transformer costs $4,000. They'll say, okay, you need to pay this guy 25%. So you get this guy, he gets $1,000 back, which kind of that LID. We put it in, we're getting our money paid back as a city. So then the next person goes in and puts a house, and they said, hey, is there capacity to transfer? Yep, there's capacity, so the third person hooks up. And he gives this guy $1,000 of the first guy who hooked it up. So now this guy has only $2,000 invested because he got paid $2,000 back. And there's 3 houses hooked up to the transfer. Fourth house comes in. Is there capacity to transfer? Nope, sorry, the first 3 houses took it up. You have to pay for the upgrade of the transformer. And he's like, wait, time out. There's why do I have to pay for the full upgrade? Well, the full upgrade is for a 50 kVA. You have to pay $5,000. The 50 kVA is still going to serve house 1, 2, and 3, but now they have to pay for the additional 25 kVA, and it's all on them. It doesn't get divided into the first 3 homeowners. It's all for that 4th homeowner.
They've
So
already
what we're
paid their
saying
way.
is,
They already paid their way.
Yeah, and so what we're saying is that's what we're talking about, these first people in, they're going to be paying for their little portion, but pretty soon somebody's going to come in, and it could be the little guy that wants to develop a house or a packing yard, and now all these people have taken up this capacity, and this guy, in order for him to put his two bathrooms in, is going to have to upgrade all of these lines going down, because you know what? Now he's at full capacity. He's going to be he's going to be the straw that broke that camel's back. So we try to bring this to the attention. That's kind of where we say first in, early bird gets the worm. But at the same time, that's the way it works. When people come in, unless you form something like an LID and you say, okay, anybody who develops, everybody has to pay their full share. So that's kind of the way it works.
You build the 50 up front rather than allowing them to build the 25.
Which is why we like it on our plan, so we can go out for funding, we can work with a port, we can try to get it built in, form the LID, we get paid back.
Well, that almost seems a little, we would be accused if we got to the situation you just described with the house that wants to come in and a small business with 2 bathrooms, we would be accused of not being business friendly. Because we're forcing them to pay all these dollars.
Business friendly to the first 3 that came to the door. Because they didn't have to do anything, because we had the capacity, but you can only plan for so much, and then pretty soon it's going to have to be upgraded.
And this is if you open it back up to your previous speakers, they will tell you that this is exactly the problem that the community recognizes that they're experiencing right now, especially Erin and her family. Their point is that all of this additional capacity that was found in 2017, it may be razor thin, and we continue to let it trickle away for whoever comes in first, buy the property, they rush to application and they get in line first. So
they take the capacity.
So it is
Still
problematic.
leaving them with nothing.
And theoretically, in some sense, because that's what vesting is under Washington state law. You get if you're first in line with your application, you're first in line. So that's how they measure seniority.
Whether or not we have capacity.
Well, one of the complaints too is the fact that certain individuals, and Erin is one of them, as is the port, were told in past when they were talking about development that we have no additional capacity. So whether they bring in whatever, we don't have the additional capacity. Now, what we've found is, as some businesses have come forward, that the studies have shown that we are able to serve them. And I don't know what they had proposed at that time, but that was part of the conversation this morning, is that there are people that have come there and they are doing upgrades as far as extending the lines, but as far as additional capacity, they're like, how can they do that when we were told there was no capacity 4 years ago? Okay. So anyway, that's part of the dilemma as well that we're trying to address.
Okay.
The other issue that was brought up, and that is the city had promised a community advisory group. I think that for the Southwest industrial area, I think that's a great example. Both of the studies that we're currently engaged on, Exit 21 and the industrial area study, both of those included a public engagement part of it, or part in the contracts that were given. And essentially what they're doing is they're going out and doing that initial analysis so that they have something to present to the public. Because just like tonight's conversation, the public could sit here and listen to it, but unless we have some specifics and we can tell them what the actual underlying numbers are, there's limited use to it. And as Tracy mentioned, postcard outreach, we will do open houses, we'll do one-on-ones with property owners, and public presentations. I use the comp plan as an example of what I expect the new model to be. There expects, I did 22 presentations, 6 open houses, you did a couple workshops, so we will make the effort to get out there. And the comp plan is a great example because that's a case where I had 8 applicants, and rather than do open houses on the applications, I stepped back and said, okay, we're going to look at options for how the community wants to grow and have this big conversation, not about the specific individual properties, but let's go out and have the conversation. That's kind of what is going to eventually going to have to happen. And both the port and Miss Thoney had brought up today, and that is, we still have to go out and talk to the neighbors and the property owners, and we recognize that. But until we kind of know, it's still a little early beyond the conversations that we already had with the comp plan, because I know no information more now than I did when I had my previous 6 open houses. So asking them to come out and talk to me about something that I have no information on, it's a little early, but we will be doing that, and that's going to be the new norm for how we go forward. Comments or questions?
I still have concerns.
Yeah, yes, and
As a system as a whole.
and so do we, because, we wouldn't have had that big conversation about the comprehensive plan if I was absolutely confident that it would implement the vision that we want for Woodland. We can't talk about specifics for Exit 21 or the industrial area, so there's a lot of...
I'm just glad you were brave enough to add more concerns to that slide.
Yeah. But I feel like for the first time, we're kind of starting to see all of the mistakes that we made and the things that didn't get done. And at least we're aware of them. Maybe we can't fix them all right now, but at least we're aware of them, and that's a huge step.
Yeah, compared to where you were 4 years ago,
Yes.
you have 3 studies plus the utility rate study. So, within a year, you'll be able to tell people that, corner you in Safeway exactly what you found out, and that you're working towards whatever vision you have, because you'll now know not only the financial side, but the vision side, plus the tool side to actually implement it.
So here's how I view studies and plans. Council approves the purchase of said study and said plan. It then gets adopted by the council as a roadmap to staff and future policymakers to say, here's what we've provided you, here's the roadmap. But at the end of the day, in my mind, is the staff's responsibility to ensure that that plan is continually moving forward, and when it needs to be tweaked or changed or modified, that come back to this body and discuss. So, the plans are great, studies are great, but really it's kind of a roadmap to use, and sometimes I just get worried. I can think of a few studies where we've had studies that have been studied, and that's where they're at. They're in a shelf somewhere, and that's where it goes. So I just want to make sure that we're executing on the plan, we're executing on the studies, on the findings, and that our policy decisions should be now based upon a study, a plan, to move us forward. So I just want to make sure that it's not something that I go, well, in Safeway, we did a study on our sewer plan, and here's what it says. I'm never going to have that conversation ever, I promise. Because it's 400 pages of, hey, here's a great plan that
I can't, what's the bureaucrat is what I think of, and it's probably a negative connotation, that they're going to be the ones that kind of mold the discussion forward and how we have it, and based upon studies and plans that we've done. So, I don't know. I think your studies and plans are only as good as the staff working the plan. You guys are the ones working Monday through Friday, 8 hours a day. I come to city council twice a month for 2-3 hours.
Yep.
Hence the reason we have to keep our staff, because
Yeah.
that's a whole lot of it. Every time we get
Yeah.
something going on, we changed.
Yeah.
And so there's no continuity in all of that. And without continuity, nothing's going to work.
Continuity is extremely important from what I've seen in my time here. And every time that there's turnover, even in the mayor's role,
Yes.
in the staff's role, when there's turnover, there is a definite impact.
Everything falls in the
Yes, it gets
big
dropped.
crack.
Where are we with the, this came up during the comprehensive plan update, and I know that it was a negative statement by myself, or it was received as a negative statement, I should say. Where are we with a master plan for the bottoms?
So that is a great question. Can,
Next Friday.
I know that some folks took that as you're trying to take everything away, but I think this is a great example. The conversation we're having this night is a great example of we're only planning for this much. Where's the rest of it? Where's beyond this? Because how many acres and land is out there, realizing that there's no intention of bringing them into the city anytime soon, or a road, but where's the plan?
When I got here, don't take this the wrong way, you said one really dumb thing and one really smart thing. you said let them live in Ridgefield.
Oh, I did say that.
That was the dumb thing.
Yeah.
And the smart thing that you said was actually really quite brilliant, and that is we need to be looking at everything that goes on in the bottoms. And if you hadn't said that, I never really would have thought that big when we were talking about the comprehensive plan.
But you bought a house in Richfield. I'm kidding.
So, but we know what's happening in the south down here in Cowlitz County, and we know that it's affecting us. You know, the last quarterly report, the data just from the building permit shows for every one house we build, Cowlitz builds one, and Clark builds one. So we are not the only tail wagging the dog here. And we know that the port is looking at property down here. We know that there's a lot of agricultural activity that is happening out there. And the more successful they are, we should applaud them. But we also shouldn't allow them to stand on our shoulders as we drown, so that they can keep their heads above water. It is unfair, and it is something that we need to address. And we don't necessarily have the effect or the influence as we go up Lewis River Road or into Clark County, but the critical aspect that we're looking at is out there to the west, and the port is here tonight because they recognize that, and they probably been shouting at the wind for a long time, because we know Aaron has, and they're now starting to understand that staff is now listening to what they're saying, and without even realizing why it was important when you brought it up, it's now becoming a lot more clear to me that this is a pretty critical outlook for our life. And whether it's railroad crossings, whether it's I-5 access, whether it's a bridge out into Clark County, we need to be able to influence what Cowlitz County does, and I'm not necessarily sure that we can do that. We are starting to have those conversations with Cowlitz County, but sometimes I get the impression that it's more so that the adults can supervise the kids as opposed to a true partnership. And at some point we need to be having conversations with the Diking District and the health department and the actual elected officials who make the decision We need to talk to the regional transportation planning organizations, and we need to get a seat at the big kids table instead of the little kids table, right?
We say it that way, but do you think that they believe that the inmates are trying to take over the prison? And we're the inmates?
Absolutely, yes.
Right, yeah,
Yeah.
okay. All right.
Mr. Goddard, another question that I have. When I'm going through the priority number that's listed here goes, two questions. First question, how did you determine the priority for each one of these projects?
So we determine the priority, and it's based on two things. It's based on funding and the probability of funding. So anything that we know that we have in line that's already been funded, that's obviously 1 or 2 or 3 that we have funding for. Then they go on down after that, meaning that, we know that, let's say we're going to do something on Salad Road or Gun Club Road, and we know that probably the percentage of that is, let's say it's going to cost $200,000. We know that in our transportation impact fees that we're going to have $200,000 next year, whatever. So we base it on what we think that we're going to be able to build and fund within that period. If we don't have any idea if we're going to be able to get funding, or somebody will come through for us in that, and we know we don't have money in our transportation impact fees, we put it as a generic number, 99 or whatever. So even though you might see them, and we start, the one, for instance, I'll give you an example, the West Scott Avenue Reconnect, which is $80 million. That's going to the bottom, because we know that we don't have $80 million anytime soon. But just because it's in that order doesn't mean it can't be moved up the following year to position number 1. So if you have one that's listed as number 99, doesn't mean it can't be number 1 next year. If some grant comes up and you apply for it, you're getting it, you can update your plan every year to say, this now is number 1, depending on what happens within the city.
So why is there no priority 2 and there's no priority 13 through 19?
Because we don't know where the funding is, so really, we don't have to put it in order and say, 13, 14, 15, 16, we can just say they're all number 99.
Okay. I like 1.
I know you do. You're asking me the question, and
3.
it's not required.
Very black and
If
white
you want, we
square.
could have.
4.
We'll try to do that next year, unless you're not here. Then we'll do 99.
Okay, that sounds good. That's a plan.
As soon as you're gone, we can go back to the right way of doing it.
Go back to the way that it really doesn't matter. What matters is what are the pretty much the top 10. What do you have funded, and what do you know that you're going to be able to fund in the next pretty much year? I would really be looking at, and that's another thing. You look at the ones and we all show them as a year within 3 years completing however many projects. It's not going to happen. We all know that. But you also have to put a year on there so you know that you're working towards funding, that we have this on our plan for this year. Now, would it be nice to have them all done in 3 years? Absolutely. But we don't know what's going to come down the pipeline as far as funding and what we're going to be able to do within a 3-year period.
Sense. Now, what the council will be presumably voting on the action items, are we adopting this map?
Yes, that is the revised map that you had on the 15th, but it has been refined from last Monday's meeting.
And is that what is included in the packet tonight?
It was not in the packet tonight. It was left on your table, the revised map. But if you didn't adopt the paper map that you got tonight, it's substantially similar to the one that you got on the 15th.
You can adopt the one that was in the packet and the revision. You do not have to adopt the one that shows the exact lines on the property line. That can be updated next year.
Okay.
So you can adopt what was actually presented to you. Because it's 1.5 dozen the other. It's the same route.
Got it.
We can just correct it for next year, since the road will be being built.
I'll make one more statement. Oh, so just to be clear, at the beginning of the meeting, there was a statement that was made about a traffic plan being budgeted for. Is that correct or no?
That's correct.
Yes.
I
Okay.
have it in the budget for next year.
Okay. How long does that typically take?
It's going to, for the budget approval?
No. To spend the money.
Spend the money, I can spend it
Yeah.
tomorrow.
How long before the study comes back? Is this like another year-long
It'll
thing?
actually take an entire year. From the time that we have the budget approved, that we hire a consultant, that we approve the consultant, it goes through council, they start studying it, it's going to be a year process.
2022.
How early can we do the RFQ?
after I have approved funding.
All right, thank you.
And it's not going to be a small number.
But it's going to be a smaller number because there's other agencies that are going to help us with that.
There's
Hey,
other agencies
eye
that
contact,
have
eye
already
contact.
contributed that we can use some of that information towards it. But they won't be helping us with it unless maybe somebody would be able to help us with it.
Well, I mean, we can move a little faster.
Yes.
Well, my Mr. Fredericks and I know I'm giving the port a hard time, but the port properties are inside the city limits. But what about the port properties that are the outside? And what about the county? Where's their contribution? Because this is really, we're planning for their growth as well.
Well, when you plan for a transportation plan, you actually don't plan outside of your city limits. You plan on what's coming into the city. You plan within your limits.
But we're kind of in a unique situation where
Yes.
the traffic is flowing through and out and back in again, and we
Yes.
have no control over. There's no other route.
Correct.
So I see that as a
Doesn't
forced
mean
partnership.
that we can't ask. Correct.
Maybe we could just get,
Toll.
maybe we should just get a rebate back on the 20% of the public safety sales tax that we send the county.
You know what, I
We
think
could
that's
just
a
get
great
that
idea.
back, that'd be great. If you could make that happen, that'd be wonderful.
He only has a few eyebrows, so you should leave it at that.
I'm just going to start pulling my eyebrow out. Or we'll just toll all the roads that go out to the county.
You know, now that's a great idea. That's probably the best.
You heard it here
idea
first,
I've heard.
folks. We're going to start tolling Cowlitz County. And the CC Street Bridge. Welcome to Woodland. Pretty soon you'll have a new road to drive on. You're welcome.
Good idea.
We're at an action item. Get myself thrown in the river with bricks on my feet. Anyone?
Bueller?
Bueller?
Okay, move to approve Resolution 17, Transportation Improvement Plan, using the map, pardon?
710.
710.
What did I say?
17.
Oh, sorry. 710, using the map given to us tonight.
Second.
Moved by Councilmember Humberg, second by Councilmember Chapman. Councilmember Humberg.
I know we don't have all the answers, but this is exciting to me because it's like we kind of finally put everything together and we have a plan to work forward and we have people that are interested and caring and it needs to happen.
Councilmember Chapman.
I concur. We're talking, it's moving forward. I've seen in the past was just a minor mop. We've got a vision, a plan, we've got a strong staff that's staying with us hopefully for a while to move us forward.
They're always on the bubble. Yeah, sorry.
And a mariner somewhere.
Further discussion?
I still don't like the fact that I don't feel we're warm and fuzzy on capacity, but I guess that's something that can be addressed at a later date. It might be separate from this. I don't. Yeah, it's separate from this, but so perhaps my comments are not germane, but I have concerns. But it's not going to stop me from supporting it.
Will the clerk please take the vote on action item A, Resolution 710, Transportation Improvement Plan 2020-2025, to include the map that was presented to council this evening?
Councilmember Rounds?
Aye.
Councilmember Benjamin? Councilmember Fredericks?
Aye.
Councilmember Chapman?
Aye.
Councilmember Graham?
Aye.
Councilmember Humbert?
Aye.
Resolution 710 has passed. Before we adjourn this evening, so back to capacity real quick. So has Ms. Thoney received an answer on someone comes knocking at her door? Or we still cannot answer the capacity question? I just want to, because I thought we were there, and then we kind of went back to no, we're not there too.
If somebody knocked on Aaron's door and said, we would like to build this, that would have to come to us in a pre-application meeting.
Okay.
And we would look at what the capacity is at that point. We cannot say whether it would be yes or a no. It depends on what goes in. Just like anybody else who comes to our door.
Okay. Depends on the project.
Depends on the project and what's being built.
Perfect. Thank you. Chair will accept a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? 8:32.
You accepted a motion to continue this meeting until midnight.
Thought you didn't get in there before Susan.
All by yourself there, sweetheart.
You didn't get in before Susan.
Then you sit there and wait for your second.
I'm still concerned that Davidson Avenue intersection is just going to get totally screwed up on that west side. I am totally concerned that that's still going to be just a shit show.
Well, with the studies, I'll make sure you have everything that I have. How this will